Hey, good morning, everybody. I wasn't sure if it was still morning there for a moment, but I'm Don Gay. I'm the horticulturalist for the Navajo for the Diné Native Plants Program under the Navajo Heritage Program with the Navajo Department of Fish and Wildlife. So it's a bit of a mouthful, but that's who I am and where I work. And so we're a restoration organization, restoration plant, native plant material center based out of the Navajo Nation for the Navajo Nation tribe. We're a three-person team that began in 20, or a four-person team that began in 2018. And we perform a wide array of services, including restoration, consultation, cultural workshops, plant production, and seed production. We're grant funded and expect to be for the foreseeable future. So you can reach us directly from our website on the Fish and Wildlife page. And so I work with Jesse, Mike, Janelle Hosea, and Nora Talkington, and that's our team. In addition to myself. So our mission is to serve as a living library for native plants, for restoration, conservation, and research to provide Diné people with access to locally sourced high quality plants for the benefit of the community, culture, wildlife, and land. The Diné Native Plants Program was created primarily due to the lack of availability of locally sourced native plant material on the Navajo Nation. We focus primarily on collecting wild plants and seeds, banking and growing local native plants for agency and community use. And so our program encompasses the entire Navajo Nation. This map is just a little depiction of all the different ecoregions present here on the Navajo Nation. And so we're really trying to build a seed bank that represents all the genetic diversity present here in over 21 ecoregions here on the Navajo Nation. Um, so producing seed on the Navajo Nation, the program is committed to producing plant and seed material while respecting the relationship between the Diné people and the cultural landscape we occupy. Our goals include honoring the cultural context of all plants and material collected and produced, respecting the reality of the Diné farmer and the challenges we face, and establishing a native seed production model that Diné farmers can implement on their own. And so something that we've also, I guess, a fourth production goal would really be to build out a network of native Navajo farmers that are producing on a large scale native seed to meet the restoration needs, not only here in the Navajo Nation, but in the greater Four Corners area. So our program and this presentation and everything that I do kind of can be categorized into these four aspects. So the wild seed collection, where we go out and collect seed from different populations across the reservation. Our nursery production, taking that seed, that plant material collection and producing it in a nursery setting, and then taking those nursery plants and putting them into an agricultural setting for seed increase purposes, and then harvesting and cleaning and producing a seed that can be marketed for restoration in the greater Southwest. And so these are just example pictures of populations that we had sampled from um, in the past few years. So we start from seed. And then from seed, the collections are made and transported back to our facility, our seed cleaning facility. And so we're pretty low tech. We use primarily brass sieves, the US standard sieves. And then in addition to a couple of different mechanical seed cleaning machines. And so from once the seeds are cleaned, they're cataloged in an online access database, a Microsoft Access program, in addition to a paper log. We're very meticulous in the way that we weigh the seed, in the way that we catalog it, in the way we document it, where we keep constant track of everything that we do. And so that's all in our database, and we're hoping, we're still trying to build it out, Microsoft Access is kind of not the best program, and we're looking into potentially moving into a new program, but that'll take some time. But we're hoping that maybe in the next 2 to 3 years that all this data that we've been accumulating will be finally we'll be able to make it more accessible to the general public. and all of you here. And so this is just a picture of our down our seed bank right now. And so we just purchased a fridge, or we just acquired a fridge, a commercial kitchen fridge. And so we're going to eventually start packaging all of these collections into plastic with their RH and temperature controlled in there. So um, this is just another picture of Agnathrum hymenioides and Dahlia candida. We're definitely trying to experiment. Not only am I constantly Not only do I manage the seed production and the seed cleaning and the greenhouse production of our programs, but I also do a lot of this small scale research. And so something we're doing right now is trying to really develop methods for propagation for all of these plants that we're producing. So we keep accurate data about all of our propagation techniques used in the greenhouse. And then all of that data is then in turn inputted into our online database. And so hopefully that'll be available soon. This is just more pictures of what peat reduction looks like during the summer. A lot of these shrub and tree species are for our riparian restoration projects in places like Saget Canyon, the northern, no, mid-northern part of the reservation towards Kayenta, Arizona, and also in addition to our new restoration projects along the riparian systems in the Cheska Mountains. And so this is kind of where all those plants are going to go. Depicted right here is probably around 2,000 plants. And so we have a large production model. This is just another good example, visual representation of what production looks like at the Diné Native Plants program. All these grass species you see growing on these tables are going to be used in our seed increase projects, whereas the previous picture was a visual representation of our riparian restoration work. Yeah, so moving on from greenhouse production, we can move into seed increase. So one of the primary things that I handle is the management of our seed increase fields. And so the goal of the Diné Native Plants program was never really to become a seed producer ourselves, but rather establish a realistic model that Diné farmers can implement here on the Navajo Nation. So we can build a network of Navajo seed producers that can meet the demand, the local and regional demand of native seed in our area. And so we have a half acre in Ganado and a half acre in Loop currently in production with plans to expand. And in both of these sites, in Ganado, we have 4 species present. In Loop, I think we have 8. So there are lots of work. So the picture on the left is the model that was implemented in Loop, Arizona. So our half acre in Loop. And it was established primarily from the Borderlands model, and a lot of where the Borderlands model was using heavily reliant on plasticulture with the polyethylene cloth and the drip tape style irrigation. And so a single cohesive piece of landscaping fabric was laid down as a weed barrier or as like a plastic mulch, and then whole individual holes were made for our transplants and were placed into those holes in conjunction with a drip line, running underneath the cloth to provide irrigation, supplemental irrigation. And so this model was successful and we have harvested seed off of this model, but it's just not very sustainable or scalable to the conditions here on the Navajo Nation, nor does it really the upfront investment of a plasticulture model like this is just not very accessible to your average Diné farmer, and the maintenance requirements to continue to operate something like this is just way beyond the capacity of your average Navajo farmer. And I think a big part of what we're trying to do right now is move away from a model like this. And so, as I mentioned before, the plasticulture model, you still have weeds. And honestly, like this particular slide is just going over the challenges that we faced trying to operate this type of model. A lot of times, well, what we found is the larger species, like pictured here, the Spirabolus viroides or the alkali sacchaton, they would outgrow those initial holes that we burned into the weed cloth, which would then require us to go in and burn even larger holes. And, over time, that just continued to degrade the integrity of our weed cloth to the point where, it was almost pointless. And then, so once those big grass bunches kind of grew out to the size of those holes burned, they would only those holes would only like act as a restriction factor to where it caused a lot of mortality. And these bunch grasses would get so big that they would kink the drip line underneath the cloth. And so, drip lines would kink and clog or be chewed, and that would result in everything downstream from the failure in the drip line to die. And so it would just result in very high mortality. And so this model, while mitigating weed pressure to a certain degree, just maybe I think in a long term hindsight view, doesn't really weigh out the benefits, don't really weigh out the costs, the initial labor and financial costs of installing and operating a model like this. And so that was kind of what we came to realize about this style. And so, as I said before, like the increased models that we were operating in loop are just like heavily reliant on plasticulture. We're constantly buying plastic. We're constantly buying landscaping staples. We're constantly having to replace torn or degraded weed cloth. And in the end of the day, it doesn't really mitigate weed pressure as well as you would think. A lot of these weeds blow in, the seed will blow in, and they'll like grow straight out of the middle of the grass bunch. And so, it kind of just negates a lot of the benefits of weed cloth. And so, to avoid like, the kinking, we decided to go with drip tubing where all emitters had to be manually installed. And so that kind of leads us into the Ganado field. And so our second half acre in Ganado was designed primarily trying to get away from drip irrigation, because in both of these locations and more broadly across the Navajo Nation, most Navajo farmers use flood irrigation. And so, if we were ever to, try to when we do build out that network of Navajo seed producers, they're not going to be able to front the $10,000 half acre model cost to install a half acre that we were able to do thanks to grant funding. And so we were trying to design a model that implemented drip irrigation or a flood irrigation so that, it would be more accessible to the average Navajo farmer. And so in Ganado, we created a network of furrows we were trying to hybridize the weed cloth model with like more of a mechanical cultivator, mechanical and flood irrigation model. So as you can see here, we created a network of furrows in addition with the weed cloth on top of the furrow, in between each furrow, I mean. And so we flood irrigated, and the first year, unfortunately, we planted into our furrows, and this was just this created all kind of problems. A lot of times the water pressure would actually wash out our transplants, and so it just wasn't very it was a model that was designed not necessarily with practicality in mind. And so unfortunately we did lose all of our crop in 2022 due to this poor planning. And so in 2023 we reinstalled all this infrastructure. And so I was the lead in this project, and we reinstalled this, and this was definitely more of a marriage between the plasticulture loop model and the more realistic flood irrigation style that I wanted originally. And so we moved from planting in the furrows to planting on the mounds, which is like, the more traditional style of like row cultivation that you would see in like an organic farm. And then we ran the drip irrigation because we still had it. And right now, like these plants are doing much better. We have almost, other than like rodent pressure, we have almost 80%, survivability. Mortality is way down in this model. But we're still at that really high initial capital investment for this, something like this. And so we're um we're still trying to move away from this. We're still trying to like develop a model that is more sustainable, both in terms of like just financially and like ecologically, because this amount of plastic is crazy to use. We uninstalled just due to old infrastructure aging, this weed cloth over 5 years will kind of degrade. The drip tape will degrade in like less than 2 seasons. And so in Loop, we had to uninstall like a quarter acre and reinstall. And it was like a literal ton of plastic we removed from that field and just hauled away to, not it was just so degraded to the point where it was unusable. And so we just had to take it to the landfill. And that was a real issue for us. And I don't think I want to continue to do that. And I don't think that's sustainable. And I think as like seed producers and people who work in native plants, we all feel like maybe these methods of relying on plastic just aren't good. And like considering the microplastic exposure to the soil and how that degrades microbial communities in the soil present on our site, that's just not in line with our vision or where we want to continue to do this, how we want to continue to do this. And so moving away from seed increase, installation and orientation, we can get into harvest. And so, as I said before, at our loop field, we have been harvesting for the past since 21 was the first successful harvest from the loop field. It took about 2 years for these grasses and forbs to mature to a point where they were producing quality seed. And so this is kind of like the average, what an average harvest looks like. I'd say you could get like at least 2 truckloads of these big 35-gallon paper bags out of a half acre. Um, and so we were able to collect these in 22, 21, and 23. Um, and so from there, those larger collections are processed at our seed cleaning warehouse, which is just an older facility, kind of like an abandoned facility that we brought back to life. A lot of these older equipment, machines, seed cleaning machines that you see depicted here, like this older debearder on the right, we just inherited from Navajo Nation Forestry. And so we're like in the process of trying to build a better facility to where we can house like state-of-the-art equipment and clean larger bunches of seed at a faster rate and make them more and just make streamline the commercial availability of Navajo produced seed. Um, so moving on, the seed increase fields, the harvests are placed into a large bin and then they're fed into through the debearder. And then from there, we have like an older style clipper that we also inherited from Navajo Nation Forestry. And so we use that to process in conjunction with the debearder and the clipper. We use that to process a lot of these huge bags, these 6 35-gallon bag harvests of Spiralis or blue grandma. We kind of have that dialed in. And so from there, this is my homemade desiccation box with my hydrometer in there. We generally dry our seeds down to 10% relative humidity. I've read in a lot of research that, any more than that, then you might actually be drawing moisture away out of the seed structure itself. And so we try to aim for that 10%, and then like we place it into our commercial kitchen fridge where it stays. And so currently we have about we have these 2 bags of Spirabilis oroides. We were We keep accurate data of how many plants we're harvesting from. So we were able to track and learn that from 300 Spiralis Roides plants at the loop field in the loop model, we were able to yield 1.9 pounds of usable seed. And then so extrapolating that data, we have an upcoming expansion, and if you were, and we know that you can fit about at a 1 foot spacing, you can fit 7,000 plants over a half acre, comfortably. And if you extrapolate the 300 plants, 1.9 pounds data, you could potentially yield every season 50 pounds of Spiralis Roides. And so at a seeding rate of 0.5 pounds per acre, you continue to extrapolate that data, and you could potentially revegetate 100 acres of degraded grassland in the Navajo Nation. And so that's kind of has us very excited about where we're going with this. We want to really bolster just that seed inventory that we have, really bulk it up and see what we can do with it. And so that leads us into our seed increase expansion in 2024. So we were recently awarded a large amount of funds from BLM to increase our seed increase operations out in Ganado, Arizona. And so we're going to expand into 2 acres by 2027. But for 2024, we only have 1 acre projected. And so this is just an aerial image of the area we're going to be moving into. And so with this, we're really I am moving away from the plasticulture model. I am not buying any weed cloth. I may purchase some drip irrigation, some tape, just for the initial planting and to keep those nice plugs adequately watered. But I'm really trying to move away from the plastic model. And so this kind of a farm orientation is very typical to what you would see here on the Navajo Nation. I always say Navajo Nation infrastructure is like 100 years behind, especially when it comes to farming. So a lot of us are still hand flood irrigating with trenches and shovels. So, apply thinking about that reality and the reality that in a farmer out here in the Navajo Nation, we're trying to create a model that is sustainable and accessible for the average Diné farmer. To get Diné farmers involved in seed increase production and native seed production, not only from an ecological standpoint, but also as a financial opportunity, where there's very limited economic opportunity here on the reservation. And so our options moving forward, we're really looking at adopting a road cultivation and mechanical cultivation model that'll allow us to recreate something like the Bamert Farms model here. Of course, they're on a center pivot using herbicide, whereas we would be like on a mechanical cultivation model without any use of herbicide, without any use of plastic, and I feel like Navajo people, especially Navajo farmers, are very adept equipment operators. 100 years of mechanical farming and mechanical cultivation. Navajo farmers are very adept at running their equipment, and I feel like a model like this, where like you could is a lot more feasible to the average Diné farmer, where you're allowing them to purchase a one-time implement, a one-time investment at around 15 to $3,000, and then running this on unlimited acreage. Whereas, like $10,000 per half acre for your average Navajo farmer in the terms of the weed cloth plasticulture model is just completely unsustainable for any small scale farm. And so this is really just adopting an organic farm model or organic row cultivation model for seed increase production for native plants. And so our hope is that, eventually over time, our plants will get so big that they'll outcompete a lot of the weeds, and we'll be able to, you know, not have to manage weeds so robustly. But this is the model that we're going with this year with our expansion in that 1 acre that I depicted previously. And so, in conclusion, the DMPP seed increase experience has had success and failure, but the true value in our work is the knowledge we have learned over time. Each attempt brings us closer to building a network of Diné seed producers that can meet the seed need here on the Navajo Nation. We have found that native seed increase is possible here in the Navajo Nation. That's like our big takeaway. Despite all the success and all the failure, we have proven that that it's possible here, that it's feasible here in the Navajo Nation. Although current models don't translate to the realities nor align with the cultural values, it's still possible. And so we're moving closer and closer to like really realizing a model that can be applied all across the Navajo Nation to meet those seed demands here and the restoration demand here in the Navajo Nation. And so with that, I'm going to close out. Um, thank you guys for listening. I am open to questions.
Thank you so much, Dondi. That was so exciting to see all the great work that you're doing. And thank you for sharing some of your wins and also challenges. We have a number of questions for you. Looking at considering your seed collection database, some folks were wondering what database you might want to transition over to or what kind of software. I think several of us have this question.
Yeah, so Um, I haven't done a lot of in-depth research. It's just something that's on my mind right now. I'm actively taking access courses just to manage our database. And as we all know, I'm pretty sure that Microsoft has discontinued access as a program. And so, like, I think if anybody wants to answer that question for me, I think that would be incredibly helpful for me as well. So that was a great question.
Fair enough. If anybody has an answer, please feel free to unmute yourself and let us know. Um, really important considerations about plasticulture. Could orchard tubing that has built-in emitters work to save on labor? If you could have some dream, oh, okay. Let's stop with that. Could orchard tubing that has built-in emitters work to save on labor?
Um, I think so, but as I said before, with my personal farm, I also run a family farm outside of everything we do with the Native Plants program. Our infrastructure is earthen canals that run out of a snowmelt reservoir. And so for me, it would still be like a really huge upfront investment to buy tanks that are big enough and to install infrastructure to allow them to gravity feed something like that across like a huge acreage, you know. So, I'm just really trying to move away from the tubing and the drip tape because you know, the reality is that, we use flood irrigation. We have like 100-year-old irrigation infrastructure present on my farm, and I just don't, even if I did, and we are actively looking for grant funding to revamp and redo our irrigation infrastructure, but even then, it would still take years before I could, implement like modern day infrastructure that could support something like that. And so, with the model that I'm currently pursuing, I have flood irrigation in mind. And so that would just allow, like we're making our rows pretty tight to where the gated pipe can efficiently circulate through the furrow system in conjunction with the cultivator, the mechanical cultivation that would keep weed pressure low.
If you could have some dream seed cleaning equipment, what would it be?
Oh, a brush machine for sure. Um, a brush machine and probably another larger column blower and maybe just like a 30-person crew.
That does help.
Yeah.
Have you considered paper mulch, like thick cardboard available on rolls instead of the plastic? Um,
Yes, we have. I've done a lot of insert. in-depth research about the types of mulch that we have available that are available commercially and used on other commercial organic farms. I've heard a lot. I've done a lot of research, and I found that I think a lot of the paper mulches don't last the season. And with our perennial plants that we're working with, they wouldn't really work in tandem. It's like you would have degrading your mulch would degrade over a season while like your plants are still trying to establish the following season just due to their perennial nature. And so I think initially that was the paper mulches and the cardboard mulches, and then also just like our winds here in the Southwest, we definitely kind of ruled those out right off the bat.
Yeah, that makes sense. Are your germination protocols available online?
Currently, no. But as I said during the presentation, we're like actively working towards making our database more accessible to the general public. If anybody is interested, like you can reach out and I'll be more than happy to try to work with you guys on what we're doing and what you're doing. But no, there's no website link that you can access all your information right now, as of right now.
What are the most challenging weed species you work with, and have you considered flame weeding?
Yeah, yeah. So last year I was flame weeding on a load scale with a blowtorch. Definitely thinking about how you can scale that up. Um, I think of the most, I a lot of weed species, like they're just weeds, but I think bindweed is something we deal field windweed is something we deal with in the ganado field, which is really hard. And so the thing about the ganado field and the loop field is there's like 150 miles between them, and they're completely different places in different ecoregions. And so you have a whole different plethora of weeds at both locations that we're trying to constantly manage. So I think out in loop, I think the alhagi, the camel thorn, is definitely the worst weed that we're trying to combat out there. Whereas in loop, we're dealing mainly with bindweed and amaranth. So, it's kind of a little specialized to both areas.
Um, we have a couple more questions if you're willing to stay a little longer, Dondi.
Sure. Yeah. I love to answer questions.
Okay. Um, it looks like you're mostly growing perennials and outplanting them into the fields as plugs. Would you consider growing annual species since these are valuable in restoration projects?
Um, I guess it would just really come down to what types of annual species. I think an annual that we really want to look into, and for me personally, I see a lot of potential in, is Cleome, the Rocky Mountain bee plant. I think that would be a really fun one to do, just given the qualities of its I think it's a Fabaceae, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I'm sure somebody is cringing out there. But yeah, so I see a lot of use in that. We did do Navajo tea, so the Thelosperma. And so that's like another, I think that's biennial, not quite annual, but biennial. And so that's more of a short-term species that we had out in the loop field that continued to reseed itself after the initial plants had died and gone away. But yeah, it's definitely something where we would like to look into.
Awesome. So one last question. Have you experimented with old wood chips as a mulch? And somebody is offering you wood chips.
Oh, yeah, sure. I'll take them. Um, yeah, we did. Initially at the Ganado field, a part of our work plan was to rent a wood chipper. And actively remove Russian olive growth, new growth Russian olive in the riparian stream there, and chip that into a mulch that could be applied into our field. But just due to restrictions around equipment, we weren't able to rent a chipper that was big enough to handle a lot of that Russian olive. And so It's definitely something we want to do. Um, but yeah, it's just sourcing that material locally and
Mhm.
is difficult, and like making purchasing here in the Navajo Nation is an incredibly hard thing to do. Like we have to jump through a lot of administrative hoops before we can't just like swipe a card as a lot of nonprofits can. And so a lot of times that puts a lot of our plans on hold. And especially when it comes to buying media or buying supplies, like I had to purchase all this stuff months in advance. Renting equipment is a huge headache. Yeah, so we're definitely limited in that capacity.
That makes sense. Well, thank you so, so much, Dondi. Thank you also to all the participants who have stayed a little bit late. I think that was a great conversation. So we'll take a break now and meet back here at 1 p.m. Mountain Time. Thank you, everyone.